Y'all may be seated. Good morning, saints. Good morning, sinners. For several years, I was what one would call the grammar police. Still others might have called me a language bully. Some others just called me plain horrible. For some reason or the other, I thought my purpose in this world was to correct the grammar of others. And nothing made me jump into action faster than a split infinitive. That's when you take the to form of a verb and you add some extra information in between the to and that verb, like an adverb or some other kind of information. To constantly correct is an example of a split infinitive. You see, I had acquired all of this knowledge through my English studies, and I assumed it was right for me to be able to help others with their language. Like all good grammar police, I jumped into action and gave my advice before asking if anyone needed it. Let me tell you, this doesn't win you many friends in life. I was insufferable to be around at times. I've since entered recovery from my annoying habit, and I occasionally slide into correction, but by the grace of God and the fellowship of recovering fellow grammarians, I've come a long way. Now, I share this story with you because I learned through it all that there's a difference between being smart and being wise. Being smart is knowing stuff, a lot of stuff. You master specific topics, whether it be auto mechanics or physics or golf swings, ancient history, or market trends. The folks who do the appraisals on the show, Antique Roadshow, they're smart. They give you all kinds of information about obscure pieces of art and furniture to reveal whether that item is worth something or not. Their knowledge is very valuable. But having book smarts about a topic doesn't necessarily mean you are wise. Wisdom is about the application of knowledge. Knowledge may come from a book or a lecture. It may come from internship or on-the-job training. It may come entirely from life experience. Wisdom, however, isn't dependent on making straight A's and being the best at what you do. Wisdom is about figuring out how best to use what you've learned so you can deal with the situations that life presents you along the way. It helps you discern your best path forward. Being smart may help you analyze your situation, but being wise will tell you how best to encounter it. Now, wisdom comes from an external source. That means it's beyond you. You aren't born with it, you can't earn it, you can only receive it. And this month we're working our way through the major themes in the Bible in a sermon series called Hitting the Books. For some of us, we've also been working our way through the books of Proverbs and Psalms using what I call Grandma's reading plan, either reading one chapter of Proverbs a day or 5 Psalms a day. Today is the last day of the month, September 30th, and we, for those who've been doing it all month long, should be at the end of both of those books. The books of Psalms and Proverbs are part of a section in our Bibles known as wisdom literature. Along with Ecclesiastes, Job, and Song of Solomon, these books encourage us to search after God's wisdom in life. Wisdom, we learn, is seeing the world as God sees it. It's traditionally thought that King Solomon is behind these few books because he asked for wisdom when God presented him a choice, or when he started his reign as Israel's king, and King Solomon chose wisdom. Solomon advanced the throne of his father David further than David could get. He brought the temple project to completion, thus providing a permanent home for God. The temple has come and gone, but Solomon's lasting legacy were these books of wisdom. In the ancient Greek, the word for God's wisdom is Sophia, which was the inspiration for Susan and me in the naming of our daughter Sophie. We hope that she'll be one who spreads God's wisdom with others. Now, every religious tradition in our world focuses on living with wisdom. Islam, Buddhism, Hinduism, and so many others have their words to train people on how to live well in life. Some of those words are very similar to the words we have in our own scriptures, and some are almost identical at times. A significant factor, however, separates us from all other religious traditions and philosophies and their approach to wisdom. And that separation is the suffering of Jesus on the cross and his resurrection that rescues all humankind. The Apostle Paul makes a bold claim for us. In the beginning of his letter to the Corinthian church, a church found at the crossroads of the Mediterranean, a church dealing with diversity of race and gender and economics and thought, the Apostle Paul says that Christ is our wisdom. And at the center of that wisdom is the cross. And he recognizes that the cross is a stumbling block to many. How could the terrible death of a Jewish man who claimed that he was the Son of God have anything to do with the redeeming of all of creation from its brokenness? This event is not something that makes logical sense. And the Apostle Paul knows that God doesn't seem very smart to make that move either. In Jesus, God dies at the hands of his creation. The enemies of God seem to win, and God looks very weak in it all, foolish even. There are many options available for God on how to deal with the problem of human sin and the brokenness it creates in our relationship with God and one another. God could wipe us all out and start all over. God could turn us into robots with no free will. God could select just a few and restart the project of creation. The options are limitless for God, and they often make more sense than the actual road God took in Jesus' death. Jesus embraces the nails. He chooses the cross in trust that his heavenly Father can redeem something out of the nothing of his death. I don't know if you experience this, but at times God can be pretty obtuse to me, which means difficult or hard to understand. And the cross is a big example of trying to understand just what God is up to in our world. Don't get me wrong, God can be very clear about certain things at times. For God so loved the world that he gave his only Son. That's very clear. Love God and love your neighbor as an answer to the question of what are the greatest commandments. That's very clear. Do good to your enemies. That's very clear. Welcome the children. That is very clear. These are all things where there is no wiggle room. God means what God says here. But at other times, God is pretty hard to understand. A cross, at least to me, doesn't seem to be a wise choice for God. The first disciples also had a hard time understanding Jesus' teachings. They ask him why he is always speaking in these cryptic riddles called parables. They have a difficult time making sense of them, and they know that the crowds around them are very confused as well. And Jesus acknowledges that confusion, but he tells them he has spoken the mysteries of the kingdom in this way so that we can truly listen. And in truly listening, we can begin to understand. Wisdom, Jesus says, is hidden beneath the puzzling words and the confusing stories. Here's what I think. The parables and the riddles and all of those hard-to-understand sayings of Jesus are part of a primer to help our eyes and our ears and our mind begin to understand just what God is up to in the cross. We have to search deeper. On the cross, we're asked to see God. In the weakest symbol of human existence, amidst death and torture and violence, we're asked to see God working God's greatest plans for all of us. We're invited to see God's awesome display of power. In a place where we would least expect to find God, God shows up. Ancient theologians had a word for this phenomenon of seeing God at work in those least expected of places, like the cross. They called it Deus absconditus, which means the hidden God. On this instrument of death, we're encouraged to see the wisdom of God magnificently displayed. And for those with the eyes to see and the ears to hear, it's truly powerful. The role that the cross plays in God's gift of wisdom to us is hard to overstate. Wisdom, as I said earlier, is about the application of knowledge. And when we upload the gift of the cross into wisdom and how we apply knowledge in our lives, we experience an absolute game changer. Here are a few ways of how living with God's wisdom displayed in the cross of Christ can help you in life. Number one, the wisdom that we receive from God through the cross helps us to deal with failure in our lives. The cross is all about failure, but you come out stronger on the other side of it. Too often in our culture, we want to be perfect all the time, and that means no opportunity to fail. We prevent our kids from failing, our spouses from failing, our businesses from failing, ourselves from failing. But the wisdom of the cross speaks to us about failure and coming out stronger on the other side of it. Failure for us will never be the last word in our lives. And failure for us is one way that God grows us up. Number two, God's wisdom through the cross helps us understand what people need in life and what you can and cannot give them. There are things that we can say yes to, and there are things that we say no to. We see this with God all the time. Some of you might wonder why God doesn't answer your prayers. And the answer to that question might be, maybe this isn't something that God can give to you. Maybe you're looking for an easy way out from a mess you made, or a quick boost to help you because you didn't put the preparation in and now you're in trouble. There are some things that we ask God for, but God refrains from giving. There is, however, something that God will always give you, and that is God's strength and God's love and God's power and God's presence to help you through whatever situation you might be going through in your life. But if you're praying for a Lamborghini to show up in your driveway anytime soon, folks, it's just not going to happen. God creates us boundaries of giving and not giving certain things to us. A similar thing happens for us in relationships. People ask things of us all the time in relationships. Our time, our presence, our wealth, our support. And we have to assess whether we can give that to them or if we can't give that to them. And it's important for us to learn how to say yes to some things and say no to other things. Creating these kinds of boundaries makes for healthy relationships. I think what would happen if I said yes to every request from my children through the course of a week? I would be bankrupt by Tuesday, right? There are things that you can say yes to and things that you have to say no to in relationships. This goes for us as a church together. We can't be all things to all people. The gift of our mission is that it keeps us very focused on what God needs from us in this time and place. And it helps us to say yes to some things and to say no to others, which means that we will never be a one-size-fits-all kind of church. For us, our mission is a healthy boundary that allows us to stay focused on our part that we get to play in God's bigger mission to love, bless, and redeem this entire broken world. Living with God's wisdom of the cross helps you understand what people need in life, what you can say yes to, and what you cannot give them. Number three, the cross of wisdom helps you not to be overreactive in life. It helps you to be slow to speak and quick to listen. Our world suffers from overreactivity, and this is caused by a failure to understand and listen to one another. It's present, this overreactivity, as a survival technique that we can protect our own agendas. Our culture is boiling in fear and anxiety right now. Fear and anxiety are displayed and magnified at such powerful levels right now that it is promoting and nurturing harmful reactions from people. The social sciences teach us that we are all connected. And when top leadership in whatever system we're in, whether it's a family system, a church system, a business system, schools, nations, world, when the top leadership promotes the emotions of fear and anxiety, it is harmful to all. Fear and anxiety promote reactive thinking. And this kind of thinking shuts down any meaningful thoughts. We move to very black and white, either or categories. I had a professor who had a sign up in our office that reminded us of the power of fear and anxiety in our lives. It read, "Anxiety makes you stupid. It makes you choose the wrong things. It does this by making us impatient and hasty to action." We're impatient because we'll do anything to address our fears and anxieties, whether that be the right thing or not. We don't take the time to be patient to explore many good options. We choose the most appealing one, and then we deal with the damage later. And our leaders, whether they be parents, pastors, teachers and coaches, police officers and first responders, managers and business executives, city officials, governors, congressional leaders, presidents, whatever have you, our leaders are charged with protecting us and keeping us safe. And in today's world, that means managing full-time their own fear and anxiety and not projecting it onto us. The wisdom of the cross is God's patient choice to deal with the magnitude of our human sin. God would be in the right to overreact to our sin and to send squads of angel armies to cleanse the world that we have broken. But God doesn't do that. God sends the Son, who never flinches in his mission of grace, so that we can all be won over by the magnitude of God's love. When we ask for God to give us wisdom, part of that wisdom will be patience that helps us become a less anxious presence around others. It will slow us down and open up a range of possibilities in our situation where we only saw dead ends before. Wisdom helps us see the world as God sees it. And wisdom helps us apply the gift of the knowledge that we discover over the course of our lives. And if you feel that you're lacking in it these days, I lift up this verse from the first chapter of James's letter in the New Testament. If any of you is lacking in wisdom, ask God, who gives to all generously and ungrudgingly, and it will be given to you. But ask in faith, never doubting. I wish that I had asked for wisdom all those years ago, and just instead of being smart in English, I'd have a lot more friends these days. Amen.